Millionaire. He took his maid to a business dinner, but what she did when he got there left everyone in shock. Mira took a deep breath, the scent of lemon polish and fresh linens filling her lungs as she tidied the last room of the sprawling estate. She had been working as a maid for Ethan Brooks, a reclusive yet powerful millionaire, for nearly 3 years. Though his reputation was as sharp as his business acumen, she had learned that there was more to Ethan than the cold exterior he presented to the world. He was a mystery, but one that intrigued her more each day. The job had started as a temporary solution for Mira. She had always been a hard worker, taking pride in the details, but her ambition stretched far beyond cleaning rooms and polishing silver. Mira had once dreamed of finishing her college degree and breaking into the business world. Yet life had its own plans, and here she was, maintaining order in a world that seemed forever out of reach. Ethan Brooks was not a man who lingered in the hallways of his own mansion, nor did he indulge in small talk with the staff. He kept to himself, his life a carefully guarded secret. Occasionally, Mira would catch a glimpse of him as he passed through the mansion, his tall figure moving with a quiet intensity. He would acknowledge her with a nod or a rare "thank you," but nothing more. And although she rarely saw him for long, she could feel the weight of his presence in every room. But one day, something changed. Ethan entered the dining room while Mira was cleaning, his expression distant, almost preoccupied. For the first time, he didn't just pass by her in silence. Instead, he stopped and watched her for a moment. Mira felt her pulse quicken as she glanced up, meeting his gaze. His gray eyes were filled with something she couldn't quite place, curiosity, maybe even interest. "Mira," he said, his voice low but clear, "how long have you been working here?" She straightened up, caught off guard by his question. "Almost 3 years, sir." He nodded thoughtfully. "You do good work. I've noticed." There was a pause, then he added, almost as if talking to himself, "You're meticulous." "Thank you, sir," she replied, wondering why he had suddenly decided to speak to her. She felt a strange flutter in her chest, a mixture of excitement and caution. He looked away for a moment, as if weighing his next words. "Do you enjoy working here?" Mira hesitated. It was an odd question, especially coming from a man who rarely showed interest in anyone's thoughts, let alone the opinions of his staff. "It's a good job, and I appreciate the opportunity," she answered carefully. He studied her for a moment longer, then gave a brief nod before turning to leave. "That's good to hear," he said as he walked away, his tone returning to the businesslike detachment she was used to. But the encounter left her unsettled. Why had he suddenly decided to notice her? And why did it feel as though he were seeing something more than the person who dusted his shelves and arranged his books? That evening, Mira found herself thinking about their conversation, replaying his words in her mind. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was changing, that the distance between them was somehow narrowing, despite the vast differences in their lives. She knew it was foolish, but she couldn't help but wonder if this small moment meant something. The days that followed were oddly tense. Mira continued with her duties as usual, but she was now hyper-aware of Ethan's presence. She noticed his habits, his routines, the way he would retreat to his study for hours at a time. And though they didn't exchange any more words, she felt his gaze linger on her whenever they passed each other in the hallways. Then, one late afternoon, as she was preparing to leave for the day, Mira found herself summoned to Ethan's office, a rarity that sent a shiver of nervous anticipation down her spine. She knocked on the door and entered, finding him seated behind his large, polished desk, papers scattered in front of him. "Please, sit," he said, gesturing to the chair opposite him. Mira sat down, her hands folded in her lap, wondering what could possibly have prompted this meeting. She watched as he studied her, his expression unreadable. "I have an unusual request," he began, leaning forward slightly. "And I'd understand if you decline, but I thought, well, it's worth asking." Her curiosity was piqued. "What is it?" "There's an important business dinner next week," he explained, his voice calm and measured. "It's with clients who value authenticity, and loyalty. I need someone with me who embodies those values. Someone I can trust. Mira felt her pulse quicken, a mix of surprise and disbelief. Was he asking what she thought he was asking? "And you want me to accompany you?" she asked cautiously, unable to mask the incredulity in her voice. He nodded. "I know it's unconventional. But yes, I'd like you to come with me to this dinner. You've been a dedicated employee, and I think you could make a lasting impression." Mira could hardly believe what she was hearing. She was a maid, not a business associate. She had never expected Ethan to notice her work, let alone trust her with something as important as this. Part of her wanted to refuse. This was, after all, a world she didn't belong in. But another part of her was intrigued, almost thrilled by the opportunity. "If you're uncomfortable with this, I'll understand," he continued, his tone surprisingly gentle. "But I think you could bring something genuine to the table that others couldn't. People appreciate sincerity, and I believe you have that quality." The words hung in the air between them, and Mira felt a strange warmth rise in her chest. For the first time, it seemed as though Ethan saw her as more than just his employee. He was looking at her as a person, recognizing her worth beyond the duties she performed. "I'm honored, Mr. Brooks," she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "If you believe I could be of help, then I'll go." A faint smile touched his lips, and he nodded in approval. "Good. I'll have someone arrange for the appropriate attire and brief you on the event. Just be yourself, Mira. That's all I ask." As she left his office, Mira felt a mixture of excitement and trepidation. She knew this was an extraordinary opportunity, but she also sensed that it was more than that. This was a glimpse into Ethan's world, an invitation to step beyond the boundaries that had defined her life for so long. And although she couldn't have known it then, this one choice would change everything, for both of them. The following days flew by in a whirlwind of preparation and nerves. Mira found herself in unfamiliar territory, balancing her daily duties with the strange new task of readying herself for the dinner. She had never been to a formal event before, let alone one with influential businesspeople, and the thought of walking into a room full of Ethan's high-profile peers left her both thrilled and anxious. Ethan had arranged everything. A personal shopper arrived at the estate the next morning, accompanied by a stylist who, with a friendly smile, guided Mira through an array of sophisticated dresses, each more beautiful than the last. She felt as though she were in a fairy tale, surrounded by glimmering fabrics and delicate jewelry that seemed to come from another world. As she tried on the first dress, a simple yet elegant emerald green gown that hugged her figure tastefully, she couldn't believe her own reflection in the mirror. The woman staring back at her didn't look like the maid who polished floors and folded linens. She looked like someone who belonged at the kind of dinner Ethan was attending. The stylist, whose name was Camille, adjusted the neckline and smiled approvingly. "You look stunning, Mira. This color brings out your eyes beautifully." Mira blushed, a shy smile tugging at her lips. "Thank you, Camille. I'm not used to this. It feels like a dream." Camille chuckled, patting her on the shoulder. "It's always surreal the first time. But remember, the confidence is already in you. The dress just helps it show." Mira felt a surge of confidence as she looked at herself once more. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine that she could truly pull this off, that she could step into Ethan's world, even if just for one night. She wondered how Ethan had even thought of inviting her to such an event. It was the last thing she would have expected from the distant, serious man she had known him to be. On the evening of the dinner, Ethan awaited her in the grand foyer. Dressed in a perfectly tailored dark suit, he looked every inch the powerful businessman, his presence commanding the room even in silence. When Mira descended the staircase, his eyes widened slightly, a flicker of surprise and approval crossing his face. "You look incredible," he said, his voice softer than usual. For a moment, the formality in his expression slipped, revealing a warmth she hadn't seen before. "Thank you, Mr. Brooks, Mira replied, unable to suppress her own smile. She felt a strange thrill at the way he was looking at her, as though she were someone important, someone he truly valued. He held out his arm, and she took it, feeling a sense of reassurance as they walked together toward the waiting car. She reminded herself of his advice, just be yourself. And yet, she couldn't shake the feeling that tonight was the beginning of something more than just a dinner. As they rode through the city in the back of his sleek car, Ethan seemed unusually talkative, explaining a bit about the people they'd be meeting. Mira listened intently, her nerves calming as she focused on his voice. He spoke about the importance of making a good impression, about how many of his clients valued loyalty, honesty, and authenticity above all else. She realized that perhaps this was why he had chosen her to accompany him. Her honesty and sincerity were qualities she had never thought of as assets in his world, yet here he was, relying on her for exactly that. They arrived at the upscale restaurant where the dinner was to be held, a modern building with glass walls that sparkled under the city lights. As they stepped out of the car, Mira felt a surge of nerves, but Ethan's presence beside her was steady, a silent reminder that she wasn't alone in this. Inside, they were greeted by a hostess who led them to a private dining room where the clients were already gathered. The room was elegant, with dim lighting and an air of sophistication that seemed almost overwhelming. Mira felt like an outsider, a stranger in a world she had only seen from afar, but she held her head high, remembering Ethan's words. They were seated at a long table alongside several other guests, all impeccably dressed, their eyes assessing her with polite curiosity. Ethan introduced her simply as Mira, his trusted friend, and she caught a few raised eyebrows, subtle glances that made her cheeks flush. But she focused on Ethan's reassuring smile, drawing strength from his calm demeanor. As the dinner began, the conversation flowed naturally, with topics ranging from industry trends to travel stories. Mira mostly listened, watching the way Ethan spoke with ease, his confidence filling the room. It was as though he belonged here effortlessly, as though this world were built just for him. To her surprise, one of the clients, an older man named Mr. Larkin, turned to her with a warm smile. "So, Mira, what's your role in Mr. Brooks's company? You seem like a very insightful young lady." Mira froze for a moment, glancing at Ethan, who gave her an encouraging nod. She knew that honesty was her only option here, that trying to fabricate an answer would only make things worse. "I actually don't work directly in the company," she began, her voice steady. "I've worked for Mr. Brooks for a few years in a different capacity. I'm a part of his household staff." A brief silence fell over the table, and Mira braced herself for judgment or confusion. But to her surprise, Mr. Larkin's smile widened. "Ah, so you're the one who keeps things running smoothly for him," he said with a twinkle in his eye. "The real backbone of the operation. Don't let him tell you otherwise." Laughter rippled around the table, and Mira felt her shoulders relax. The tension broke, and soon, everyone was sharing stories of their own lives, some even admitting to starting out in unexpected roles themselves. She realized that these people, despite their wealth and success, valued sincerity more than she had assumed. Throughout the dinner, Mira noticed Ethan glancing at her from time to time, a look of admiration in his eyes that made her heart flutter. She knew she had been honest, that she had represented herself, and him, with the integrity he had hoped for. As the dinner came to a close, the clients were visibly charmed by Mira's presence, complimenting Ethan on his choice of company. Mr. Larkin, in particular, seemed delighted by her, offering a few parting words that she'd remember long after the night ended. "It's rare to find someone so genuine these days," he said, shaking her hand warmly. "You've made a remarkable impression, young lady. Don't ever lose that spark." Mira thanked him, her cheeks flushed with pride, and as they left the restaurant, she felt a surge of confidence she hadn't known she was capable of. She had faced her fears, stepped into a world that had once seemed closed off, and somehow, she had managed to hold her own. Ethan opened the car door for her, his expression unreadable as he watched her. Once they were inside, he looked at her, his eyes filled with a mix of pride and something else she couldn't quite place. "You did wonderfully, Mira," he said quietly, his voice laced with admiration. "Better than I could have hoped." She smiled, her heart racing. "Thank you, Mr. Brooks. I didn't think I could do it, but tonight felt different. Like I was a part of something more." He nodded, his gaze intense. "You were. And I was right to trust you." Over the next few days, the impact of the dinner lingered with Mira like a thrilling, unexpected dream. She replayed every moment in her mind, the way Ethan had looked at her, the warmth of the clients, and the surprising sense of belonging she'd felt. She could hardly believe that she, a maid, had been able to navigate the complex world of the wealthy so seamlessly. The rest of the household staff had noticed a change, too. Though Mira tried to downplay the event, word had spread that she had accompanied Ethan to a high-profile dinner. Her co-workers offered her smiles, sometimes curious glances, and even a few whispers about the possibility of more between her and Ethan. Mira brushed off the comments, but a part of her couldn't deny that the thought had crossed her mind, too. Ethan, however, seemed unaffected by the dinner's success. He returned to his usual routine with his characteristic composure, but Mira felt something subtle had shifted. She noticed him watching her occasionally, his gaze lingering a little longer than before, as though he were contemplating something. One afternoon, a few days after the dinner, Mira was cleaning the library when Ethan appeared in the doorway, catching her off guard. "Mira," he began, his voice soft, "I wanted to talk to you about the other night." Her heart raced. She straightened, wiping her hands on the cloth she held, and met his gaze. "Of course, Mr. Brooks. I hope everything went well." A faint smile played on his lips. "It went better than I'd anticipated. The clients were impressed, especially Mr. Larkin. I received a message from him yesterday, thanking me for keeping good company." Mira couldn't help but smile, her cheeks warming. "I'm glad I didn't let you down." He took a step closer, his expression shifting from businesslike to something more personal. "You did much more than that. You reminded me of something, that authenticity is rare, even in my world. It's easy to forget what truly matters when everyone around you is chasing status and success." Mira felt her cheeks flush. She wasn't used to hearing him speak so openly, especially not about himself. She had only seen glimpses of the man beneath the businessman, but now, it felt as though he were inviting her to see more. "Thank you," she said softly, not quite knowing what else to say. They stood there in silence for a moment, a tension simmering between them that she couldn't quite define. His gaze held hers, and for the first time, she saw a hint of vulnerability in his eyes, as though he were searching for something in her that he couldn't find elsewhere. "I was thinking," he began, his voice hesitant. "Perhaps we could make this a regular arrangement. I have several more dinners coming up, and it would be helpful to have someone like you by my side. Someone who isn't just there for appearances." Myra's heart skipped a beat. She knew that accepting his offer would blur the lines between employer and employee, that it would draw her even deeper into his world. But the thought of stepping into that world again, of experiencing the life she had only dreamed of, was exhilarating. I would be honored," she replied, her voice steady despite the excitement bubbling within her. Ethan's eyes softened, a glimmer of satisfaction in his gaze. "Good. Then it's settled." Just as he was about to turn to leave, he hesitated, as though debating whether or not to say something more. Finally, he looked at her, his expression thoughtful. "Mira, I don't say this lightly, but you have a remarkable ability to adapt, to carry yourself with dignity, no matter the situation. You're more than just an employee. I see potential in you." The words struck her deeply, filling her with a warmth that made her heart ache. No one had ever spoken to her like that, had ever seen her as anything beyond the role she played. She swallowed, barely able to respond. "Thank you, Mr. Brooks," she managed, her voice thick with emotion. "That means more to me than you know." They exchanged a small smile, and he left, leaving her alone in the quiet of the library, her mind racing with thoughts she dared not voice. The following week brought with it another dinner. This time, Mira felt more prepared, her nerves tempered by the confidence she'd gained from the last event. She wore a new dress, a sleek, midnight blue gown that Camille had helped her choose, and as she looked at herself in the mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back. She looked composed, elegant, as though she belonged in Ethan's world. Ethan's reaction when he saw her was subtle but unmistakable. His gaze traveled over her, and a faint smile touched his lips, one that held an unspoken approval. She felt her cheeks flush, but she held her composure, reminding herself that she was here as his support, nothing more. This dinner was held at a prestigious art gallery, where influential guests mingled among priceless works of art. Mira followed Ethan through the crowd, aware of the curious glances directed at them. She stayed close, listening intently to the conversations around her, absorbing the nuances of the business world she was beginning to understand. As the night progressed, Myra's confidence grew, and she found herself engaging in small talk, answering questions with ease, and even making a few of the guests laugh. Ethan observed her with quiet admiration, occasionally offering her a reassuring glance. But as she glanced around the room, she noticed a group of women gathered by a nearby sculpture, their gazes fixed on her with judgmental expressions. She could hear their whispers, snippets of their conversation that made her stomach twist. "Who is she, anyway?" one of them muttered, her tone dripping with disdain. "She doesn't look like she belongs here." "She's probably just a fling," another whispered. "I've seen his type before. They don't last long." Mira felt a pang of humiliation, but she forced herself to keep her head high. She had known that stepping into Ethan's world would come with its challenges, and she wasn't about to let a few cutting remarks shake her. Still, the comments lingered, a reminder that she was an outsider in a world where appearances meant everything. Ethan seemed to sense her discomfort and subtly moved closer, placing a gentle hand on her back, a silent reassurance. She glanced up at him, and the warmth in his gaze melted away her insecurities. "Are you all right?" he asked softly. She nodded, her smile small but genuine. "Yes, I'm fine. I just need to get used to this." He gave her an understanding look, and they continued through the event together, his presence a steady anchor. As the night drew to a close, he excused himself briefly to speak with a client, leaving Mira by one of the grand windows that overlooked the city skyline. As she gazed out at the sparkling lights, she felt a strange mix of pride and sadness. She had been given a glimpse of the life she had once dreamed of, yet a part of her wondered if she would ever truly belong here. She thought of the whispers, the judgmental looks, and the invisible line that separated her from the world Ethan moved through so effortlessly. But then she remembered his words, the way he had told her that she was more than just an employee, that he saw potential in her. And as she stood there, watching the city lights, she resolved to prove to herself that she was worthy of this, that she could make a place for herself in his world. When Ethan returned, he found her standing by the window, her gaze distant but filled with determination. He watched her for a moment, his expression unreadable, as though he could sense the inner struggle she was facing. "Ready to go?" he asked, his voice gentle. She turned to him, her resolve firm. "Yes. I'm ready." As the days passed, Myra's role in Ethan's life grew more complex. She had returned to her usual duties at the mansion, yet something had shifted. The nights she spent accompanying him to dinners or events were now part of her life, creating a curious balance between two very different worlds. Ethan's words about her potential echoed in her mind, igniting a determination she hadn't felt in years. One evening, after a particularly long day, Mira was cleaning the dining room when Ethan walked in unexpectedly. He was dressed in casual clothes, an unusual sight, with his sleeves rolled up and a relaxed expression on his face. She quickly stood up, feeling flustered. His usual formality was gone, replaced by an ease that took her by surprise. "Good evening, Mr. Brooks," she said, regaining her composure. He waved a hand, brushing off her formal greeting. Mira, you can call me Ethan when it's just us. I think we've been through enough dinners together to be on a first-name basis, don't you? She hesitated, her cheeks warming. It was rare for him to drop the professional barrier, and his casual tone made her heart skip a beat. All right. Ethan. He smiled, clearly pleased, and gestured to a chair at the dining table. Would you mind sitting with me for a moment? There's something I wanted to discuss. She placed her cloth on the counter, unsure of what he had in mind, and took a seat across from him. The warm lighting cast a gentle glow around them, and for a moment, it felt as though they were in a different world, one where titles and barriers didn't exist. Ethan leaned forward, his gaze steady. I've been thinking about those dinners. You've adapted incredibly well. Most people would have been intimidated, but you handled yourself better than most professionals I know. Thank you, she replied, a sense of pride swelling within her. I never imagined I'd be able to, honestly. Have you ever thought of doing something more? He asked, his tone curious. Beyond working here, I mean. You're clearly capable, Mira, and I've seen how well you connect with people. I could help you expand your skills, maybe even take on a more official role if you're interested. Mira's heart pounded as his words sank in. The idea of working beyond her current position had been a dream, one she had kept locked away, thinking it was out of reach. But hearing him suggest it, seeing the sincerity in his eyes, was like a spark of hope she hadn't expected. I would love that, she said, her voice filled with emotion. But, are you sure? I don't have formal experience in business. He nodded. I'm sure. Experience isn't everything. I see potential in you, Mira. The kind of potential that can't be taught. She was quiet, processing the unexpected offer. It was almost too good to believe. But before she could respond, they were interrupted by the arrival of a woman whose sudden presence filled the room with tension. The woman was stunning, with striking features and an elegance that demanded attention. She wore a fitted dress and exuded confidence as she walked toward Ethan, her gaze cold and assessing. Mira immediately felt self-conscious, but acutely aware of her modest work attire and the stark contrast between them. Ethan, the woman said, her tone sharp but familiar. I didn't expect to find you here, especially not like this. Victoria, Ethan replied, his expression guarded. This is Mira. Victoria barely acknowledged Mira, her eyes narrowing with suspicion. So, she's the one you've been bringing to dinners. Interesting choice. Mira felt a pang of discomfort but forced herself to remain composed. Victoria's words were laced with judgment, and though she didn't know the woman, it was clear that she had a history with Ethan, one that was complex, perhaps even unresolved. Ethan's expression hardened. Mira has been an excellent companion and support. If you have something to say, Victoria, say it to me. Victoria gave a small, mocking smile. Oh, I just find it curious, that's all. You're always so selective about who you let into your world, yet here you are, turning your maid into, what, exactly? The words stung, and Mira felt herself flush with embarrassment. But Ethan's hand reached across the table, giving hers a brief, reassuring squeeze. The touch was subtle but powerful, reminding her that she wasn't alone. Mira is here because she's earned my respect, Ethan said firmly. And she's proven her worth more times than I can count. Victoria raised an eyebrow, a smirk playing on her lips. Well, it's your business, Ethan. Just remember, people are watching. They'll wonder what kind of message this sends. With that, she turned and left the room, her heels clicking against the marble floor, leaving a silence heavy with unresolved tension. Mira sat in stunned silence, her mind racing with questions. She knew little of Ethan's past, and Victoria's presence had reminded her that there was still much she didn't know. The distance between their worlds felt wider than ever, and for the first time, she wondered if she truly belonged in his life. I'm sorry about that, Ethan said, his voice soft with regret. Victoria and I have a complicated history. She doesn't understand what I'm trying to build now. Mira looked at him, trying to process her emotions. It's all right. I understand that people from your world might see me differently. His gaze softened, and he reached out again, his hand resting over hers. That's not what I see. Mira, don't let anyone make you feel less than who you are. You belong here as much as anyone else. She smiled, feeling a surge of warmth despite the tension. But the encounter had left its mark, a lingering reminder that no matter how close she and Ethan became, there would always be a part of his life that was out of reach. In the following days, Mira resumed her duties with a renewed sense of purpose, determined to prove herself worthy of Ethan's faith. But she couldn't shake the feeling that Victoria's words had left. The judgment, the disdain, it had opened her eyes to the harsh realities of Ethan's world, to the social lines that would always divide them. Yet she also couldn't ignore the changes in Ethan's behavior. He became more attentive, spending more time in the mansion and less on his work trips. Small gestures, a cup of coffee waiting for her in the morning, a shared smile across the room, made her wonder if he felt the same connection that had been growing in her heart. One evening, as Mira was organizing the library, Ethan appeared in the doorway, watching her with a thoughtful expression. Mira, he said softly, stepping into the room. About what we talked about the other night. I meant it. I want you to be part of my life, in a way that's meaningful. Not just as an employee, but as a partner in this new path I'm creating. The vulnerability in his voice took her by surprise, and she set down the book in her hands, looking up at him. Ethan. I don't know what to say. Then don't say anything, he replied, stepping closer. Just think about it. They stood in silence, the distance between them shrinking as he reached out, his fingers brushing hers. The touch sent a shiver down her spine, and she knew that whatever choice she made next would change everything. But as she met his gaze, she knew her heart had already made its decision. Myra's heart raced as she processed Ethan's words. He wanted her as a partner, not just a support or companion for dinners, but as someone who could share in his life, his world. She could hardly believe it. For years, she had felt like an invisible presence in his home, a background figure. And now, he was offering her a role that was more intimate, more permanent. That night, Mira lay awake, her mind churning with thoughts of what this new life could mean. The prospect was exhilarating and terrifying all at once. But there was no time to linger in uncertainty. The very next morning, Ethan requested her presence in his office, a place she had rarely ventured, usually reserved for closed-door meetings with high-powered clients. When she entered, she was greeted by a sight that took her breath away. Ethan stood by his desk, waiting, but the usual air of formality was softened by his warm, almost hesitant smile. Good morning, Mira, he said, his voice steady yet gentle. I know I dropped quite a proposal on you last night, and I want you to know that there's no pressure to decide immediately. But I have another invitation. She blinked, surprised. Another invitation. He nodded, gesturing to an envelope on the desk. She noticed the elegant logo of a prestigious gala printed in gold on the front, instantly recognizing the event as one of the most exclusive in the city. It was an annual event attended by the who's who of business, culture, and politics. Mira had read about it before, admiring the glamorous photos in magazines but never imagining she'd get any closer to it than that. I want you to attend this gala with me, Ethan continued, his eyes holding hers. Not as an employee or as my support, but as my official guest. Her heart skipped a beat. This was far beyond the intimate dinners or private gatherings she'd attended at his side. This was a public statement, a declaration that she was someone who mattered in his life, someone he respected and valued enough to introduce to his world. Ethan, she began, trying to collect her thoughts. This is such an honor, but are you sure? He smiled softly, stepping closer. I've never been more certain, Mira. You have an authenticity that people notice. I want you by my side, not just for appearances, but because you belong there." Her face flushed with emotion, and she nodded, unable to deny the hope blooming in her chest. "Then yes, I'll go with you." The following days were a blur of preparation. Once again, Camille, the stylist, arrived to help Mira choose a dress worthy of the gala. Together, they sifted through auctions until Mira settled on a timeless black gown, simple yet elegant, with a flowing skirt and delicate beading along the neckline. The gown made her feel sophisticated and confident, as if she were shedding her old life for something entirely new. The night of the gala finally arrived, and Ethan sent a car to pick her up. As she stepped into the sleek vehicle, she could feel her nerves building, but she reminded herself of Ethan's words: she belonged here. She was worthy of the life that awaited her on the other side of the night. When she arrived at the venue, Ethan was waiting outside, his eyes lighting up as she approached. His gaze was warm, appreciative, and she felt a thrill in knowing that she'd made an impression on him, that she'd taken a step into his world with confidence. "You look incredible," he murmured, offering his arm. "Thank you," she replied softly, taking his arm as they entered the grand hall together. The gala was everything Mira had imagined and more. The room sparkled with chandeliers, the guests draped in gowns and tuxedos, mingling over glasses of champagne. The atmosphere buzzed with an energy that felt almost magical, and she had to remind herself to breathe as she took in the grandeur around her. They moved through the room, Ethan introducing her to his colleagues and acquaintances, each of whom greeted her with polite smiles and raised eyebrows. She knew they were curious, wondering who this woman was by Ethan Brooks's side, but she held her head high, determined to make a good impression. At one point, they paused near a group of businessmen Ethan clearly knew well. They exchanged greetings, and Ethan introduced Mira as the close companion and trusted partner, a description that made her heart swell with pride. For the first time, she felt like she was being seen not just as a guest, but as someone of importance in his life. The evening continued smoothly until a voice from behind her caught her off guard. "Mira," the voice said, cold and familiar. She turned to see Victoria, the woman who had visited Ethan's mansion just days before, standing there, her eyes narrowed with barely concealed disdain. She was dressed in a stunning crimson gown, her posture exuding the confidence of someone who felt she belonged. "Victoria," Mira greeted her, trying to keep her voice steady. "Good to see you again." Victoria's eyes swept over her, the barest hint of a smile on her lips. "I'm surprised to see you here, of all places. I suppose Ethan is making unconventional choices tonight." Before Mira could respond, Ethan stepped forward, his tone calm but firm. "Victoria, Mira is my guest, and I'd appreciate it if he showed her the respect she deserves." Victoria's smile tightened, but she quickly masked her irritation. "Of course, Ethan. I just hadn't realized you were bringing staff to events of this caliber." Ethan's expression hardened. "She's here because she's earned my respect and trust, and she has every right to be here." Mira felt a warmth in her chest at his words, but she could see that Victoria's presence was stirring emotions in Ethan that he'd been trying to keep in check. Victoria's judgmental gaze, her dismissive tone, it reminded Mira that she was still viewed as an outsider, a woman out of her depth in this glittering world of wealth and privilege. As Victoria turned to leave, Ethan turned back to Mira, his gaze filled with concern. "I'm sorry about that," he said softly. "Victoria has always been difficult." "It's all right," Mira replied, forcing a smile. "I know I'm not the kind of guest people expect you to bring." He frowned, taking her hand gently. "You're exactly the kind of person I want to bring, Mira. You're authentic, grounded, qualities that people in my world don't often value, but I do." They stood there for a moment, his hand warm around hers, and Mira felt a surge of gratitude for the trust he had placed in her. She was no longer a maid, no longer an observer in his life. She was someone he valued, someone he wanted by his side. As the evening wore on, they found themselves on the balcony, away from the crowd. The city lights stretched out before them, a beautiful, shimmering expanse that felt infinite. Mira leaned against the railing, the cool breeze a welcome contrast to the warmth of the crowded hall. Ethan stood beside her, his gaze distant as he looked out over the city. "I want to be honest with you, Mira," he said quietly, his voice tinged with vulnerability. "Inviting you here tonight was a statement, not just to everyone else, but to myself." She looked at him, her heart pounding. "What do you mean?" He turned to face her, his expression softening. "For years, I kept people at a distance, kept my life carefully compartmentalized. But meeting you, you reminded me of something I thought I'd lost. A sense of purpose, of connection." Mira felt her cheeks warm, her pulse racing. "Ethan. I didn't know." He took her hands, his gaze intense. "You've shown me that there's more to life than success and reputation. You've shown me that it's possible to trust, to let someone in. Tonight, I wanted you by my side because you're the person I trust most." His words left her speechless, and she felt tears prick at her eyes. In that moment, everything she had struggled with, her doubts, her insecurities, seemed to fall away. As they stood there under the city lights, Ethan leaned in, his face close to hers. She could feel his warmth, the steadiness of his presence, and she knew, deep down, that this moment would change them both forever. With a quiet whisper, he murmured, "Mira, I." But before he could finish, a sudden flash of light caught their attention. They turned to see a photographer snapping photos of them, his camera clicking as he captured the intimate moment. The interruption shattered the quiet, pulling them back to the reality of the world they were in, a world where privacy was fleeting and secrets rarely stayed hidden. Ethan's expression darkened as he took her hand, leading her back inside. But as they returned to the gala, Mira knew that their relationship had just crossed an invisible line. There would be no going back, no pretending that this was just another night. They were in this together, and whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them side by side. The morning after the gala, Mira awoke to the buzz of her phone on the nightstand. She blinked in confusion as message after message lit up her screen. Friends, old classmates, even distant relatives she hadn't spoken to in years were reaching out with a mix of curiosity and shock. The messages ranged from casual inquiries to blatant demands for answers. "Mira, is it true? Is that really you in those photos with Ethan Brooks? I had no idea you were dating a millionaire." Mira felt a rush of anxiety as she opened the message from Amy, a friend she hadn't spoken to in a while, which included a link to an online article. Her heart pounded as she read the headline. "Ethan Brooks, reclusive millionaire, spotted with mystery woman at City Gala." The article was peppered with photos from the event, including the moment on the balcony when Ethan had leaned in close to her, his hand in hers, both of them looking out at the city. The photos captured the intimacy between them, the closeness that only they had shared. But there, splashed across the screen, was their private world laid bare. Just as Myra's pulse quickened with dread, her phone vibrated with another message. This time, it was from Ethan. "Can we talk? Please come to the mansion as soon as you can." The drive to Ethan's mansion felt longer than usual, the weight of the article hanging over her like a dark cloud. As she pulled into the driveway, she saw Ethan waiting by the door. Dawn was the warmth she had grown accustomed to. In its place was a guarded expression, a look of frustration mixed with concern. She walked up the steps, her heart pounding as she met his gaze. "I'm so sorry," she began, unsure of what else to say. "I didn't think. I didn't know anyone was watching us." Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair. "This is my fault, Mira. I should have anticipated something like this. The gala is one of the biggest events of the year, and the press, well, they were bound to be there." They moved inside, the weight of the silence between them growing heavier. He led her to the study, where stacks of newspapers and printed articles covered the desk. The headlines varied, but the implications were clear. Reclusive millionaire finds romance with mystery woman, inside the private life of Ethan Brooks and his unexpected date. Myra's stomach churned as she scanned the words. The speculation was endless, with each outlet trying to unearth details about her background, her history, and, worst of all, her past as his maid. She felt exposed, vulnerable, as though her entire life had been laid bare for public consumption. "Ethan, what do we do?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Everyone's talking about us." "About me." He looked at her, his expression softening. "I'm sorry, Mira. I never wanted this for you. I wanted to keep our relationship safe, private. But now that it's out, we have to handle it carefully." She swallowed, feeling the reality of his words settle over her. Does this change anything?" He took a step closer, reaching out to hold her hand. "Not for me, Mira. I care about you, and that hasn't changed. But this situation is complicated. People in my world, they can be cruel, judgmental. They'll scrutinize every part of your life, just as they have mine." Mira nodded, her mind racing with the implications. She could already imagine the whispers, the accusations. She was the maid who had caught a millionaire, the Cinderella story that society would either romanticize or tear apart. And Victoria's face flashed in her mind, the look of disdain, the judgment, the certainty that Mira didn't belong in Ethan's world. "Is it worth it?" she whispered, unable to hold back the doubt. "I don't want to be the reason you lose respect, or for people to think." He interrupted her, his grip on her hand tightening. "You're worth it, Mira. You're worth everything. And anyone who doesn't see that isn't worth our time." She felt tears prick her eyes at his words, the sincerity in his voice melting away her fears. But before she could respond, they were interrupted by a knock at the door. A man in a dark suit entered, a public relations consultant whom Ethan had called to help them manage the stand-up. He introduced himself as James, a calm, collected man with a clipboard in hand, and immediately began outlining strategies. "First, we need to address the headlines," James said, glancing between them. "This is already circulating through every major outlet, so silence will only fuel speculation. We have two options. Either we downplay the relationship, call it a simple misunderstanding, or we prepare an official statement acknowledging Mira as your partner." The word partner made Myra's heart flutter and her nerves fray all at once. She glanced at Ethan, unsure of what he wanted to do, unsure of what she wanted to do. She had been thrust into his world without warning, and now her privacy, her autonomy, her past, all of it was up for public dissection. "What do you think, Mira?" Ethan asked gently, his gaze steady. "This is your life too. I don't want to make this decision without you." She took a deep breath, grappling with the weight of it all. Part of her wanted to escape, to retreat back to the safety of anonymity. But another part of her, the part that had felt that undeniable connection to Ethan, the part that had stood beside him as his equal, knew that walking away would mean losing something precious. Finally, she looked at James, then at Ethan, her voice trembling but resolute. "I want to be honest. I don't want to deny what we have or pretend to be someone and not. If we're going to face this, then let's face it as ourselves." Ethan's face softened with pride, and he nodded. "Then that's what we'll do." Over the next few days, the PR team worked tirelessly to craft a statement that would present their relationship in a way that felt authentic yet respectful. Mira watched as Ethan navigated countless phone calls and meetings, his life disrupted by the invasion of privacy. She couldn't help but feel guilty, even though he reassured her repeatedly that he wouldn't change his decision. The public's reaction was mixed and the official statement was finally released. Some people were fascinated by the modern-day fairy tale, admiring Ethan for choosing someone genuine over superficiality. Others, however, were quick to judge, claiming Mira had ulterior motives, that she was nothing more than a gold digger. The whispers, the criticism, it hurt more than she'd anticipated. Each new headline seemed to chip away at her confidence, making her wonder if she could endure the scrutiny of being with a man like Ethan. One evening, as she was preparing to leave for the day, she found herself pausing in the hallway, lost in thought. She had sacrificed so much just to fit into his world, yet it felt like the world was constantly reminding her that she didn't belong. Ethan found her there, her shoulders slumped, her gaze distant. He placed a gentle hand on her arm, his expression full of concern. "Are you all right?" She looked at him, struggling to find the words. I don't know if I'm strong enough for this, Ethan. Everywhere I turn, it feels like people are judging me, questioning why I'm here." He nodded, his gaze intense. "I know. And I wish I could take it all away, Mira. But I can't do this alone. I need you here with me. You're the one who showed me what's real, what matters. Without you, this world feels empty." His words touched her deeply, and she knew that he was fighting just as hard as she was to make this work. But as she looked at him, she realized that the judgment of others was something she couldn't control. All she could control was her own strength, her own belief in what they had. "I'm here, Ethan," she whispered, her voice filled with conviction. "No matter what, I'm here with you." He pulled her into a tight embrace, and for a moment, the world and its opinions faded away, leaving only the two of them, bound by something stronger than fame, wealth, or status. The next day, they faced the world as a united front, attending an art exhibition together, Ethan's first public appearance with Mira since the gala. The paparazzi were relentless, cameras flashing as they entered the venue hand in hand. Mira felt the weight of every gaze on them, but Ethan's grip on her hand was steady, grounding her. They moved through the crowd with quiet confidence, ignoring the whispers, the stares. And as they admired the artwork, Mira felt a sense of peace, a quiet acceptance that she belonged there, by his side. She realized that they didn't have to prove anything to anyone. Their love, their commitment, was enough. By the end of the night, Mira felt a strength she hadn't known was possible. They had weathered the storm, and while she knew there would be challenges ahead, she also knew that together, they could face anything. Because in the end, she wasn't just his maid, his dinner companion, or his guest. She was the woman he loved, the woman who had stood by his side even when the world tried to tear them apart. And that was a role no headline or judgment could ever take from her. In the weeks that followed their first public appearance as a couple, Mira felt her world shift. The media attention had intensified, every outing, every glance, every small gesture between her and Ethan seemed to make headlines. The scrutiny was relentless, with articles questioning everything about her past, her intentions, and her suitability as Ethan's partner. It was a storm unlike any she had ever experienced, and despite Ethan's unwavering support, the weight of it sometimes felt unbearable. One morning, Mira sat in the cozy kitchen of Ethan's mansion, sipping her coffee and scrolling through the latest online comments and articles. She knew she shouldn't look, that it would only make her feel worse, but curiosity got the best of her. The comments stung. "She's a nobody. How did she get him to fall for her? Does she even have an education? What could she possibly have to offer? Gold digger, plain and simple." She could feel her confidence unraveling with every word. She had always been proud of her resilience, of her ability to rise above challenges, but this was personal. Her life, her character, her worth, all laid out for strangers to judge. As if sensing her distress, Ethan appeared in the doorway, his expression softening when he saw the look on her face. Without a word, he crossed the room, took her phone gently from her hands, and set it aside. "Stop reading those comments, Mira," he said, his voice calm but firm. "They don't know you, and they don't know us. You can't let strangers make you doubt yourself." She looked up at him, a small, helpless smile on her face. "I know I shouldn't care, but it's hard not to. It's like they've taken everything I am and twisted it into something ugly." He sat down beside her, taking her hand in his. "I know it's hard. But remember, those people don't see what I see. They don't know the strength, kindness, and intelligence that drew me to you. They only see a distorted version of you." She nodded, squeezing his hand as she took a steadying breath. Thank you, Ethan. I don't know how I'd get through this without you. You're not alone in this, Mira. We're in this together. And I have an idea that might help. Later that afternoon, Ethan suggested they take a trip, just the two of them, somewhere quiet, far from the media frenzy. He had a private cabin in the mountains, surrounded by nature and shielded from prying eyes. Mira could feel the tension melt away at the thought of leaving the chaos behind, even if just for a few days. The drive was peaceful, the city slowly giving way to winding roads lined with trees and the cool, crisp air of the mountains. As they neared the cabin, Mira felt her spirits lift. This was exactly what she needed, a break from the noise, the opinions, the endless pressure of living under a microscope. The cabin was cozy and inviting, with large windows that overlooked a serene lake surrounded by towering pines. Myra's heart swelled as she took in the view, grateful for the tranquility that wrapped around them like a comforting blanket. Ethan carried their bags inside, his expression more relaxed than she had seen in weeks. He took her hand, guiding her to the back porch, where they sat together in silence, the sound of birdsong filling the air. This place is beautiful, Mira whispered, her voice hushed in awe. Ethan nodded, a small smile on his face. It's my sanctuary. I come here whenever I need to get away, to clear my mind. I thought it might help you, too. They sat together, watching the sun set over the lake, its golden light reflecting off the water in a breathtaking display. Mira felt a sense of calm settle over her, a reminder that there was more to life than the opinions of others, that her worth wasn't defined by strangers who knew nothing about her heart. After a long silence, Ethan spoke, his voice thoughtful. Mira, I've been thinking a lot about the future, about us. Her heart skipped a beat, but she stayed quiet, waiting for him to continue. I know this has been difficult for you, he said, turning to face her. But despite everything, I've never felt more certain about wanting you in my life. You've shown me what it means to care for someone, to build a life with them, and I want to keep building that with you. Myra's eyes filled with tears, the weight of his words sinking into her heart. She could see the sincerity in his gaze, the quiet determination that told her he was willing to stand by her, no matter what. Ethan, she began, her voice trembling, I feel the same way. This has been the most challenging time of my life, but I wouldn't trade it for anything. You mean everything to me. They embraced, holding each other close as the last light of the day faded. In that moment, all of her doubts, her fears, melted away, leaving only the certainty of their love, a love that had withstood judgment, challenges, and public scrutiny. Over the next few days, they settled into a rhythm of quiet mornings and peaceful afternoons. They spent their days hiking through the woods, cooking meals together, and talking about their dreams and fears, their lives unfolding in a way that felt both new and deeply familiar. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Mira took a deep breath, gathering her courage. Ethan, I've been thinking. I want to do something with my life. Something more than just waiting tables or cleaning rooms. He looked at her, a spark of interest in his eyes. What do you mean? She hesitated, feeling vulnerable as she revealed her dreams. I've always wanted to start something of my own. Maybe a small business, something that lets me help people, that gives back. I don't know what it would look like yet, but I want to build something meaningful. Ethan's face softened with admiration. I think that's a wonderful idea, Mira. And I'll help you in any way I can. Mira smiled, feeling a surge of hope and excitement. For the first time, she began to see a future where she wasn't just a side character in someone else's story, but the protagonist of her own. When they returned to the city, Mira felt a renewed sense of purpose. She spent hours researching business ideas, planning, and even taking a few online courses that Ethan had recommended. Though she knew the media would likely continue its relentless coverage, she felt better equipped to face it, armed with a dream that was hers alone. One day, while Mira was working on her plans in the library, Ethan came in, holding a newspaper. His expression was unreadable as he handed it to her, and Myra's heart sank, wondering what new scandal awaited her. But as she scanned the article, her eyes widened in surprise. It was an in-depth piece written by a journalist who had taken a different approach. The article highlighted Myra's story, her hard work, her humility, her resilience. It painted her as a woman of character, someone who had earned Ethan's respect and admiration. She's a reminder that true worth isn't defined by status or wealth, but by the kindness and determination that often go unseen, the article concluded. Mira felt a swell of emotion, gratitude mixed with relief. Someone had finally seen her for who she truly was, beyond the headlines and speculation. Ethan placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. See? The world's starting to understand. They're seeing the real you. Tears welled in her eyes, and she turned to him, smiling. Thank you, Ethan. For believing in me. For seeing the good in me, even when I couldn't see it myself. He smiled back, pulling her into an embrace. I always will, Mira. And whatever path you choose, whatever dreams you pursue, I'll be right beside you, every step of the way. In that moment, Mira knew that their journey was far from over. There would be challenges, and the world would continue to watch. But for the first time, she felt strong enough to rise above it all, with Ethan's love and her own inner strength guiding her forward. And as she looked into his eyes, she knew they were ready to face whatever the future held, together. Myra's newfound confidence fueled her forward, and she threw herself into building her business idea. With Ethan's support and connections, doors began to open, and she found herself meeting with mentors and advisors who helped shape her vision. She was transforming from a woman who had once only dreamed of a different life to someone actively creating it, one step at a time. But just as things seemed to be falling into place, the piece she had worked so hard to build was disrupted. One afternoon, as Mira wrapped up a business meeting in a downtown cafe, she was approached by a tall, slender woman dressed in sharp business attire. The woman's eyes held a familiar coldness, a calculated assessment that made Mira instantly wary. Hello, Mira, the woman said, extending a perfectly manicured hand. I'm Cassandra. I work for Hale Enterprises. I thought it was time we met. The name sent a chill through Mira. Hale Enterprises. Ethan had once mentioned Marcus Hale, an old rival in the business world, someone with a reputation for ruthless tactics and manipulation. The last thing she wanted was any association with someone like Marcus, and yet here he was, sending someone to her, to speak on his behalf. I'm not sure what you want, but I don't think we have anything to discuss, Mira said, her tone polite but firm. Cassandra's lips curled into a slight smile, ignoring the brush-off. On the contrary, I think we have quite a bit to discuss. Marcus has taken an interest in your story, Mira. He sees you as an intriguing variable in Mr. Brooks's life. Mira felt her stomach tighten, a knot of unease building. I don't see how my life concerns him. Oh, but it does, Cassandra replied smoothly. You're an inspiration to people, Mira. A woman from humble beginnings, now in a relationship with a millionaire, building a business of her own. But there are many people who doubt you. And, well, some people would be willing to help you prove them wrong. Marcus thinks you could use that kind of help. Myra's mind raced. Marcus Hale had made a name for himself by using people as pawns, bending them to his will through clever manipulation. The last thing she wanted was to be indebted to him or to owe him any part of her success. No, thank you, she said, keeping her voice steady. I'm not interested in anything Marcus has to offer. Cassandra's smile didn't falter. Of course. But should you ever reconsider, here's my card. Let me remind you, though, that people can be fickle. Mr. Brooks included. You may want to think about securing your own future, independent of him. Mira took the card reluctantly, not wanting to cause a scene, but her resolve was firm. Thank you, but I'm quite secure with the choices I've made. Without another word, she turned and walked away, her heart pounding. She wanted nothing more than to forget the encounter, but Cassandra's words stayed with her, lingering like an unwanted shadow. She couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of Marcus's attempts to meddle in her life. That evening, Mira recounted the strange encounter to Ethan. His face darkened as she mentioned Marcus's name, his jaw clenching as he listened. "Marcus has always been like this," he said, frustration simmering beneath his calm exterior. "He's threatened by anyone he perceives as a threat, and now he's fixated on you because he knows what you mean to me." Mira reached out, placing her hand over his. "Ethan, I'm not going to let him come between us. I turned down his offer, and I have no intention of accepting anything from him." He softened, his hand tightening around hers. "I know, Mira. But I hate that he's trying to manipulate you, trying to make you question us. He's always played these games, but I refuse to let him make you feel insecure." They sat in silence, the weight of the situation hanging between them. Mira could see how much it hurt Ethan, how much he wanted to protect her from the worst parts of his world, yet there was no easy way to shield her from it all. "I'm here because I want to be," she said softly, her voice steady. "I chose this. And whatever challenges come with it, we'll face them together." Ethan nodded, a hint of relief in his eyes. "Thank you, Mira. That means everything to me." But the encounter with Cassandra had planted a seed of doubt, and as much as Mira wanted to shake it, the fear lingered, fear that Marcus wouldn't stop, that he would use every resource he had to drive a wedge between them. Over the following days, Mira threw herself into her work, hoping to drown out the unease that haunted her. She met with advisors, refined her business model, and began working on the logistics of her launch. The progress was exhilarating, yet there was always a lingering shadow, a worry that Marcus might resurface at any moment. Then, one evening, as she was finishing up a meeting, her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "You're building a nice little empire, Mira. Let's see if it lasts." Her hands shook as she stared at the words. There was no question in her mind who had sent it. Marcus was watching her, waiting for her to slip up, to show some weakness he could exploit. But this was her dream, something she had built from the ground up, and she wouldn't let him take it from her. Determined, she decided to address the issue head-on. She dialed Cassandra's number, her heart pounding as the line connected. "Ah, Mira," Cassandra answered smoothly. "I had a feeling I'd hear from you. I don't know what game Marcus is playing, but tell him to stay out of my life," Mira said, her voice firm. "I don't need his help, and I don't want anything to do with him." Cassandra chuckled, her tone as icy as ever. "Mira, Marcus never offers help without reason. He simply sees potential in you, potential that you may not realize you have. But if you insist on rejecting his support, well, that's your choice. Just remember, people often find their loyalties tested when things get difficult." The call ended, but her words lingered, twisting like thorns in Mira's mind. The sense of threat was clear. If she continued to reject Marcus's influence, there would be consequences. Later that night, Ethan found her sitting alone in the study, her shoulders tense, her gaze fixed on the fireplace. "Mira," he said softly, concern in his voice. "Is everything all right?" She looked up, hesitating before she spoke. "Marcus isn't letting go, Ethan. He's trying to undermine everything I've worked for. He wants me to doubt myself, to question my place in your life." Ethan's expression turned hard, his fists clenching. "Enough is enough. I won't let him bully you, Mira. If he thinks he can use you as leverage against me, he's in for a rude awakening." Mira reached out, her hand resting on his arm. "But what if this keeps escalating? I don't want to become a pawn in his game." He took her hand, his gaze fierce with determination. "You are not a pawn, Mira. You're my partner. And I'm done letting Marcus interfere in our lives." Over the next week, Ethan took action, enlisting the help of a security team and legal advisors to gather evidence of Marcus's harassment. With their support, they filed an official complaint, a move that sent a clear message: Ethan would not be intimidated, and Mira would not be bullied into submission. Still, despite their best efforts, Marcus's influence seeped through in subtle ways. Stories began circulating online, anonymous sources painting Mira as a gold digger, a manipulator. Friends from her past were contacted by reporters, probing for any hint of scandal that could be tied to her name. It was exhausting, infuriating, and overwhelming. But Mira's determination only grew. She had come too far to let anyone dictate her future, and she knew that standing strong was the only way to prove she belonged in Ethan's world. One evening, as she and Ethan sat together on the balcony, watching the city lights flicker below, she took his hand, her gaze steady. "I'm done letting Marcus stare me," she said, her voice filled with quiet strength. "I'm going to keep building my life, my business, and our future, no matter what he does." Ethan looked at her, pride shining in his eyes. "I believe in you, Mira. And together, we're stronger than anything he can throw at us." They sat in silence, a united front against the storm that surrounded them. And as they held each other close, Mira knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, she would face them with unwavering resolve. Because their love had been tested and strengthened, forged through adversity, and she knew that together, they could withstand anything, even the darkest shadows of Ethan's past. Mira was growing stronger, her resilience more fortified than ever, but Marcus's campaign against her was relentless. The stories he spread seemed to multiply, twisting even the smallest details of her life into rumors that seemed specifically designed to chip away at her credibility, her character, and, ultimately, her confidence. Yet she refused to give in. Every day, she showed up for herself, pushing forward with her business plans and focusing on her future with Ethan. But Marcus's tactics became increasingly invasive, and Mira knew they had reached a breaking point when she received an anonymous package at Ethan's mansion. Inside was a dossier filled with photos from her past, private information about her family, and disturbing threats, all underscoring Marcus's message that he could control her life if he chose to. One note in particular made her blood run cold. "If you want to protect Ethan, remember who has the power. Walk away, Mira, or things will get worse." That evening, Ethan found her sitting alone, the open dossier on the table in front of her. She couldn't bring herself to look up as he entered the room. Her shoulders were tense, and her eyes were glassy with unshed tears. "Mira," he said gently, kneeling beside her and reaching for her hand. "What happened?" Wordlessly, she passed him the dossier, her voice barely above a whisper. "He's threatening my family, Ethan. He's trying to steer me away from you." Ethan's expression hardened as he flipped through the pages. His jaw clenched, his eyes narrowed, and an intensity Mira hadn't seen in him before came to the surface. She could see his own anger and frustration boiling over, fueled by his inability to protect her from Marcus's invasive manipulation. "We can't let him do this," he said, his voice firm but low. "Marcus has crossed a line, and he's made this personal. It's time I dealt with him directly." Mira looked up at him, alarmed. "Ethan, what are you planning to do?" He held her gaze, determination etched in every line of his face. "I'm going to confront him, Mira. He's been using every weapon in his arsenal against us, but he won't expect us to fight back. It's time to show him that we won't be intimidated." The next day, Ethan arranged for a private meeting with Marcus, setting up the rendezvous at a high-rise building owned by one of Ethan's trusted business partners. The meeting was strictly confidential, with only the two men and their lawyers present to ensure that nothing could escalate beyond negotiation. Mira was uneasy, her mind racing with fears of what might happen. Marcus was ruthless, manipulative, and willing to push limits that most people wouldn't even consider. She worried that Ethan might get trapped in his schemes, that somehow, despite their best efforts, Marcus would find a way to twist the situation in his favor. Hours passed, and Mira's anxiety grew with each tick of the clock. She tried to focus on her work, on her business plans, but her thoughts kept drifting back to the meeting, to the unknown outcome that could change everything. Finally, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Ethan. It's done. Come to the office. When she arrived, Ethan was waiting for her in his private office, looking composed yet exhausted. His lawyer, a shrewd woman named Claire with a reputation for handling high-stakes cases, was standing beside him, her expression a mix of satisfaction and caution. It's over, Ethan said as Mira entered the room, relief in his voice. We reached an agreement. Myra's shoulders sagged with relief, but she couldn't keep the weariness out of her voice. What kind of agreement? Claire answered, her tone precise. Marcus has agreed to cease all contact, including direct or indirect harassment of you, your family, and anyone associated with Mr. Brooks. He signed a binding legal contract that prohibits him from any further interference in your personal or professional life. We have enough evidence against him to keep him in line, should he try anything in the future. Mira looked between them, still trying to process it all. So, he's really gone. Ethan nodded, stepping closer and taking her hands in his. He's gone, Mira. We've cut him off completely. He won't be able to touch us again. She felt a wave of relief wash over her, the weight of the past months finally lifting from her shoulders. She wrapped her arms around Ethan, burying her face in his chest as she allowed herself to breathe for the first time in what felt like forever. Thank you, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. I don't know how I could have done this without you. He held her tightly, his own relief evident. You don't have to thank me, Mira. You're my life. I'd go through anything to protect you. In the days that followed, the tension between them eased, and Mira found herself focusing once more on the future she had envisioned. With Marcus gone, she felt empowered to continue building her business, and Ethan supported her in every way he could, even joining her for meetings and brainstorming sessions as her dreams became tangible plans. They spent more time together, moving freely through the city, no longer glancing over their shoulders or worrying about hidden threats. Their relationship had been tested in the harshest of ways, and Mira felt stronger than ever, knowing they had survived the ordeal and emerged closer than before. One evening, as they sat on the balcony watching the sun set over the city, Ethan took her hand, a spark of excitement in his eyes. I've been thinking about what comes next, he said, his voice warm and inviting. Mira smiled, tilting her head curiously. Oh. What did you have in mind? He hesitated, his gaze softening. I want us to move forward, to build a life together. Not just in our careers, but in every way. You've changed my life, Mira. You've shown me what it means to care for someone, to truly trust someone. I don't want to lose that. Her heart raced as she listened, feeling a swell of emotion. She could sense that this was more than just a declaration, it was a promise, a commitment to the life they'd fought so hard to protect. What are you saying, Ethan? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. He turned to face her fully, taking her hands in his and gazing into her eyes with an intensity that left her breathless. I'm saying that I want to build a future with you, Mira. I want us to be together, fully, without holding back. Tears filled her eyes, and she nodded, unable to speak as joy surged through her. They had come through so much, and now, finally, they were free to be together, unburdened by the ghosts of the past. Over the next few months, Mira and Ethan began planning a life together. She poured her heart into her business, with Ethan by her side every step of the way, while he continued his work, blending his world with hers in a way that felt natural and right. With their public relationship established and Marcus no longer a threat, the media's interest gradually waned. The sensationalized stories and rumors faded, replaced by genuine curiosity about Myra's business success and her growing influence. She was no longer Ethan Brooks's maid, she was her own person, respected and admired in her own right. And as she and Ethan walked through the city, hand in hand, Mira knew that they had truly overcome the obstacles that had once felt insurmountable. She was no longer defined by her past or held back by the judgments of others. She was living a life she had built herself, alongside a man who loved and respected her for exactly who she was. One evening, as they stood on the balcony once more, watching the stars above the city, Ethan slipped his arm around her, pulling her close. "Mira," he said softly, his voice filled with warmth, "I want you to know that no matter what challenges come our way, I'll always be here with you." She smiled, leaning into his embrace. "And I'll be here for you, Ethan. Always." They stood together in silence, their hearts united, their lives intertwined. For the first time in what felt like forever, Mira felt at peace, secure in the knowledge that the future they had fought so hard for was finally within their grasp. And as she looked up at the stars, she knew that this was only the beginning of the beautiful life they would build together. In the weeks that followed, Mira and Ethan settled into a life together that felt more real and grounded than either of them had ever imagined. The challenges and battles they had endured had only strengthened their bond, and their shared dreams had turned into tangible plans. Ethan had even offered to be an investor in Mira's business, not just out of love but because he genuinely believed in her vision. She accepted his support, and together, they crafted a foundation for her project that was both stable and meaningful. As her business took shape, Mira found herself surrounded by a supportive team of mentors, friends, and industry professionals who recognized her drive and talent. The doubters from the past faded, replaced by people who believed in her, and the whispers that had once haunted her grew quieter with each new accomplishment. One evening, after a long day of meetings, Ethan surprised her by taking her on a drive to a piece of property just outside the city. It was a serene plot, with sprawling meadows and a lake that shimmered under the evening sky. Mira felt her breath catch as they walked along the edge of the property, hand in hand. "This is beautiful, Ethan," she whispered, her eyes wide as she took in the landscape. "But why did you bring me here?" He turned to her, a hint of mischief in his eyes. "I thought we might start our new chapter here, together. I know we love the city, but I've always dreamed of having a home in a place like this, somewhere we could build something lasting. Somewhere that's truly ours." Mira looked up at him, her heart racing. "You mean, you want us to build a home here? Together?" He nodded, a gentle smile spreading across his face. "Yes, Mira. I want us to create a life here, one that we can build from the ground up, just like you've done with your business, and just like we've done with each other." Tears filled her eyes as she processed his words. This wasn't just a house, it was a symbol of everything they had fought for, everything they had dreamed of. It was a testament to their love, their resilience, and the promise of a future they would share. "Yes," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "I would love that, Ethan. I want to build our life here, with you." The months that followed were filled with plans and excitement. Mira and Ethan worked with architects and designers to craft a home that reflected both of their personalities, a place filled with warmth, light, and the promise of a bright future. The house took shape slowly, each room a reflection of their shared dreams, their unique tastes blending into a beautiful, harmonious space. Their lives moved forward seamlessly. Mira's business officially launched with a grand opening, attended by friends, family, and Ethan's business associates who had become her own supporters. The media, who had once criticized her, now heralded her as a rising entrepreneur, a woman of strength and vision. She had earned respect not just as Ethan's partner but as a leader in her own right. One evening, as they were walking through their half-finished home, Ethan led her to what would eventually be their bedroom. The view from the room was stunning, overlooking the lake with the city skyline visible in the distance. They stood together, looking out at the lights that dotted the horizon, reflecting on how far they had come. "Mira," he said softly, turning to face her, "we've been through so much. There were times I worried that my world would only bring you pain, that it would weigh you down." She looked up at him, her eyes filled with warmth. "Ethan, your world didn't weigh me down, it showed me what I was capable of. It helped me find myself in ways I never thought possible. You gave me the strength to fight for my dreams, and I wouldn't trade that for anything." He took her hands, his gaze filled with a mixture of pride and love. "I couldn't have done any of this without you, Mira. You've become my partner in every way, my equal. And I want to spend the rest of my life building this life with you. Her breath caught as he slowly knelt down, pulling a small, velvet box from his pocket. Opening it, he revealed a simple yet beautiful diamond ring that sparkled in the soft light. Mira, he whispered, his voice filled with emotion, will you marry me? Tears welled up in her eyes, and she nodded, her voice barely able to escape as she whispered, yes, Ethan. 1,000 times, yes. He slipped the ring onto her finger, and they shared a kiss, sealing their commitment to one another. In that moment, surrounded by the promise of the home they would build, Mira felt a happiness she had never known. They had both come so far, had endured challenges and heartbreak, but they had emerged stronger, bound by a love that had only deepened with time. The wedding was a beautiful, intimate ceremony held at the property, with close friends and family gathered to witness their vows. Under a canopy of blooming flowers, Mira and Ethan pledged their love to one another, each word a testament to the journey that had brought them here. They danced beneath the stars, laughter and music filling the air as they celebrated the beginning of their new life. As the night grew quiet, they stood together on the terrace of their new home, looking out over the lake, their future stretching out before them, full of possibilities. Over the years, Myra's business flourished, growing beyond her wildest dreams. Ethan continued his own work, yet he found a new purpose in supporting her, becoming her biggest advocate and confidant. Together, they created a life that was both fulfilling and balanced, a blend of hard work and joy, ambition and simplicity. Their home became a place of laughter, of family and friends, of quiet evenings spent by the fire. It was a sanctuary, a place where they could be themselves, free from the demands and judgments of the outside world. And as the years went by, Mira often thought back to the beginning, to the woman she had once been, the maid who had quietly gone about her duties, never imagining that she would one day stand here, hand in hand with the man she loved, living a life she had built herself. She had faced challenges she'd never anticipated, but with Ethan by her side, she had grown into the woman she had always dreamed of becoming. She had learned that true strength came not from power or wealth, but from resilience, from staying true to oneself even in the face of adversity. Looking out over the peaceful landscape, Mira knew that she was exactly where she was meant to be. She and Ethan had built a life together, one that was rooted in love, respect, and shared dreams. And as she leaned her head on his shoulder, watching the sun set over their home, she knew that their journey was far from over, that the love they shared would carry them forward, through every challenge, every joy, every beautiful, ordinary moment yet to come.